And he did. I did something which I think refers exactly to sacred activism. I said to him, I'll never have this chance on such an exalted and amazing day to ask you this question. So, Your Holiness, what is the meaning of life? And he flung back his head and he roared with laughter, and because what a question. And then he took it very, very seriously and he looked at me very, very strongly and he said, the meaning of life is to embody the transcendent. And if I had to say what sacred activism is, it's embodying in your actions the transcendent laws of peace, compassion, and wisdom. And I believe that if we don't, we are going to die out and take a great deal of nature with it. And if we do, we will transform ourselves and create a new humanity.
Well, I've read His Holiness' book, the Dalai Lama, The Art of Happiness,
yes,
like 3 times.
Yes.
And each time I read it, I just have a new realization that I didn't before. But one thing I got out of that book is the Dalai Lama has an exhausting schedule.
Yes.
And all for social activism, and yet he's a happy person. So you can be a social activist and be happy.
Well, this is why I wrote my book, because the phenomenon that I see in front of me is a lot of seekers who are bliss bunnies, who are really out of it and don't notice that the world is burning to death and an environmental holocaust, don't notice that 2 billion people are living on less than $1 a day. And then, on the other hand, a lot of activists who are very angry and very burnt out and very exhausted. So I asked myself the question, what is wrong with this picture? And what's wrong with this picture is that the mystics aren't really taking love seriously enough to put love into the action that it requires to be put in the crisis that we're in. And the activists, who are very often very angry about religion for very good reason, don't know that there's a great difference between religion and spirituality and aren't doing any inner work. If an activist is inspired by his or her inner life and does sacred practice, then he or she has access to enormous energy. His Holiness, I've spent days with His Holiness. It's exhausting. At the end of the day with His Holiness, you have to go and lie down in the dark place somewhere and just pray that your bones will reassemble. But he has that strength because he feels it from sacred practice.
Well, and I've read that His Holiness gets up at like 3, 4 in the morning,
yes.
and before he starts his day...
3 hours.
Oh, it's 3 hours.
Yes.
I heard 2 hours, but...
No, it's 3 hours, and I once also met Mother Teresa. And I asked her...
Wait, you met Mother Teresa too?
Yes,
is there
it's
any
in
other?
my book, yes.
Okay.
No, and I've been very lucky in my life. I have really devoted my life to spiritual illumination, and through God's grace I've been able to meet a lot of the great teachers in the world. And I asked her, well, I said, how on earth do you sustain it, picking up the sick and the dying every single day of your life? How do you get through it? She said, I couldn't do it if I didn't get up in the early morning and just sit in front of the host. Her form of practice was to sit in front of the host and adore the divine through the host. And she said, I couldn't do it if I didn't
The host?
The host, the wafer, the communion wafer. It's a form of Catholic adoration. You adore the presence of divine in the wafer. But really it was a way in which she poured herself out to her beloved, who was Jesus. She said, I don't do it. I couldn't do it. I am filled with sacred energy through just emptying myself in adoration. Why I've written this book is to really say to all mystics, get off your mat and start acting. Use the energy of your prayer and contemplation to fuel real action. And also to activists, for God's sake, please, link your actions and your wonderful energy and your noble passion to deep spiritual practice, because then you'll find you have the strength to go on going on. This is very important for the crisis we're facing, I think.
Yeah, I remember a quote of Mother Teresa's that said, I am just a pencil in God's hand writing a love note.
Yes. But it's a lovely quote, but when you have to understand what a pencil is, it's completely dead and it has no will of its own, and you have to surrender that deeply to be used as an instrument
Well,
like that.
well put. Now, you talked about the inner practice.
Yes.
How often do you meditate each day?
I meditate every morning. I do several practices because, as I try to say in my book, I don't think just meditation is going to be good enough. I say in my book that if you're going to rise to the challenge of this crisis, which I believe is a potentially terminal and certainly all-defining crisis, we're going to need 4 kinds of practices. Cool practices that calm you down, The Buddhists are great at being calm, so the Buddhist practices are very good. Heart practices that awaken the heart, that keep the heart juicy, because all of our hearts are threatened by despair and doubt and overload.
What awakens our heart?
Well, the practices that I find most powerful are the Tibetan practices of Tonglen and the Buddhist practice of metta. Tonglen is a wonderful practice when you take the pain of the world into your heart and imagine it like a black smoke, take it into your heart and then dissolve it in the open sky of your heart. You think of your heart as an open sky, and then you send back to people in pain or to the world in pain love and peace. It's an immense practice.
Do you have any meditative suggestions in your book?
Oh yes, I have about 32 meditative suggestions, because the whole point of this book is to give helpful, practical indications to people how they can use these things in the thick of daily life and in the thick of sacred action.
What age did you start to meditate?
I was a complete skeptic between about 9 and 24. And then when I went back to India, I had a series of experiences that I couldn't deny. That was 25. And since then, I have been doing serious spiritual practices.
So approximately 30 years.
Yes, I should be a lot further on than I am, but I'm doing my best.
Yeah, and were you here in the United States during the '60s? When the
no, I wasn't, but I was in England, of course, thrilled that all of you were running onto the streets and protesting against the Vietnam War, mostly because it annoyed my parents tremendously. They begged me not to wear my hair long, and which I did. And no, the '60s were crucial for me because they woke me up. They woke me up to the possibilities of radical transformation.
You know, when I go, in recent times to political events, people that want to change the world, it's more older people than younger people.
I think one of the things that upsets and alarms me the most is the agony and apathy of the young. I think they think of us as stupid, corrupt fools who have ruined the world, and they think that we've done such a terrible job of it that they have no hope. And they do have a lot on their side. But I have a lot of young people in my life, and I think that more and more of us should take the responsibility of mentoring young people, of really helping them to have a larger and richer view of this crisis. Well, this book has actually been received wonderfully by a lot of young activists who have said to me, "Thank God you're writing with the kind of passion we're longing to hear."
Well, I think where the young activists are coming is like through the food revolution.
Yes.
Getting back to nature, which gets you back to God. And through the more Eastern practices
and
like
in animal
yoga.
rights, there are a lot of very passionate. I have 3 or 4 friends who are great sacred activists. One of them is 24 years old. She's a young, very beautiful California girl, and she has just decided to help the widows of men who have committed suicide in India because they couldn't pay the rent for their land. So she has put her life on the line, and I keep meeting quite extraordinary young people who have really risen to this challenge.
And is she from the United States?
Yes, she's a Californian. She looks like a younger Charlize Theron. She's amazing.
Yeah.
She could have been anything. She could have been a model.
I've never been to India,
Oh,
but how do
come.
how do Indians perceive people from the United States?
I think Indians have great respect. One of the things that I love about India is that India has enormous sacred tolerance for all kinds of people. You feel very much at home in India when you are there. They're very welcoming to you, especially if you show any deep interest in their religion and their ancient understanding. They will really pour themselves out for you. I was born there and I speak a little of the language, and it's my blood, it's my heart, but I've always been amazed at the courtesy of Indians and that the great, great love they have for people of all kinds.
Mm-hmm. Now, I think you've mentioned 2 of the meditative practices. The second one was opening the heart.
Yes.
What's the third and the fourth?
The third, I think, is prayer. When you come to a really desperate moment in your life, and I'm sad to say that I've been in several of those, I'm glad to say, actually, because it teaches you everything you need to know about how to get through a crisis like ours. I found prayer, direct prayer, incredibly important. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you can't do the cool practices. Sometimes your heart is too shattered to do the heart practices. But you can always, always cry out to the beloved. You can always cry out to God. You can always say simple words of deep, deep love, and they connect you directly. And the fourth kinds of practice, and I know you do yoga, mm-hmm. I believe very strongly that this crisis that we're going through is